going to see the start of a new framework from your perspective of the United States in the Southeast Asia region?
Well, I think China welcomes ASEAN's role, a constructive role in, I think, settling the Korean Peninsula issue. And we welcome this. And also, I think the new U.S. policy toward ASEAN is also changing. Mr. Trump's policy toward the South China Sea issue maybe now it changed slightly from what his predecessor has been adopting. Right. And also the Philippines has also adopted a new policy toward the United States. I don't think the Philippines will follow the United States if the United States continues to make provocations against China in the South China Sea issue.
I see everybody has their bottom line now, of course. Yes. Mr. Hidari, and final words from you. 20 seconds you've only got, unfortunately. So any thoughts about the new framework, about the DPRK nuclear issue rather than the South China Sea dispute? And final words from you.
Well,
20 seconds you've only got.
On the top of the list of Trump, it seems the focus on the South China Sea has declined, and now Trump is very much focused on mobilizing diplomatic support, including from Philippines and China, to deal with the North Korean problem. So the era of strategic patience is over, and now Trump is openly thinking about preventive war. And I think this is something that all of us should be worried about.
From policy at home to a challenging situation abroad, North Korea, the president says he knows a lot about dictator Kim Jong-un, telling Reuters he's 27 years old, his father dies, took over a regime, so say what you want, but that is not easy, especially at that age. I'm not giving him credit or giving him credit or not giving him credit. I'm just saying that that's a very hard thing to do. And to whether or not he's rational, I have no opinion on it. I hope he's rational. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson also gave some thought to Kim's psychological stability. Watch.
All indications are that he is not crazy. He may be ruthless. He may be a murderer. He may be someone who, in many respects, we would say by our standards is irrational. But he is not insane.
Mike Pregent is an adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute and a former intelligence officer. Great to have you today and get your perspective on this. Let's start with the crazy, shall we? Because you've always heard that about this dictator. You back away sometimes from that language, I would think, Mike, because you don't want to give somebody an automatic out if, in fact, you think you're going to have to fight them. That's kind of the underlying thing that I see. What's your take?
Well, thanks for having me, Harris. Yeah, you don't want him to believe that you're going to do something because he may in fact be crazy and he may do something in desperation. I think it's good outreach to Kim Jong-un to say, listen, I know it was tough being 27 years old and becoming a dictator with all the knives out. Let's talk. Let's talk about your nuclear program. I think it's interesting that in 2016, Kim Jong-un increased his nuclear tests and also missile launches in hopes of getting an Iran deal-like benefit, meaning you could keep your nuclear program and you'd get a windfall of cash. The Obama administration ignored him, and I think he miscalculated with the Trump administration because they are looking at an imminent threat. So I think it's a good message to him to.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, though? It is completely opposite of some of the tough talk you've heard from our UN Ambassador Nikki Haley at the United Nations, and then the tougher talk from the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who basically said, not only is the military on the table, but have you seen what we did over there? Have you seen what we might do? Like, we got
Right.
stuff coming your way.
Right, right. When you assess what would have happened if we would have taken out Iran's nuclear facilities, you look at what Hezbollah would have done to Israel. In the case of North Korea, if we take out their nuclear facilities, we look at North Korean artillery decimating the demilitarized zone and Seoul. So there are two different calculations. So this is a positive message to the North Korean dictator that, hey, we don't think you're crazy, so don't do anything crazy.
You know, Mike, I wonder about this. In the
Right.
8 years under President Obama, we heard the words whenever North Korea would do something, they're saber rattling. I, in
Right,
my
right.
lifetime, have yet to see an actual saber in someone's hands. So I don't know how much rattling people do, but that's not what this president is saying anymore. The language has shifted. How significant is it?
Well, it's significant because if you look at the repositioning U.S. naval forces in the area, what Japan's doing, what South Korea is doing with their training missions, and then what we're seeing from North Korea, this is brinkmanship. This is what brinkmanship looks like. Now it's time to lessen the rhetoric and start seeing if there's some solutions. China's probably influencing Trump as much as Trump is influencing China on how to deal with North Korea. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is China telling the Trump administration, hey, let's stop calling him crazy. Let's try to look at what a crazy man would do with a nuclear arsenal.
You know, a lot is always made about this first 100 days of a presidency, and a lot of the mainstream media, and sometimes all of us catching ourselves talking about that. But this actually is impressive to have gotten to this point on the 99th day where you have such a huge shift in talk coming out of the biggest house in the land, the people's house. It really is.
Yeah, it's sending messages to everyone. Pyongyang, Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Damascus, Baghdad, all the places you want the message to go.
House in the land,
United
the people.
States is different now. These first 100 days have not been like the last 8 years. You're going to be held accountable for your actions.
Any risks? What are they?
The risks. The risks are, what does a crazy dictator do if he believes there's an imminent U.S. strike? And that's the main concern, especially with North Korea's ability to punish South Korea. The other risks are, what messages does it send to other capitals if we don't do anything?
Mike Pregent, thank you for your time.
Wenchun is a border city in northeast China, neighboring the DPRK, which prospers from trade with the DPRK. Seafood is one of the major imports.
哪儿产的呀？这个朝鲜啊，您这是海鲜都是哪儿的呀？
都朝鲜的居多。
不，你们自己运过来的吗？对啊，我这刚从朝鲜回来吗？
I'm now standing before the Chuanhe port of the Huichun city. Across the border is the DPRK's recent special economic zone. Every morning, Chinese businessmen and trucks will be waiting here to get across the border for trade. And now it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They are coming back with full loads of goods and products from the DPRK.
I go to the DPRK almost every day to buy basic goods like squid. It's cheap and has better quality.
Not all of the traders buy the goods for themselves. Liang says for more profits, local traders often hire people to divide the merchandise into small shares to bring back. But despite this busy scene of cross-border trade, not all is well. Peng Dian has a seafood processing factory in the DPRK. His main business is exporting the semi-finished product back to China. Given the current tensions on the Korean peninsula, he doesn't want his face shown on TV.
I definitely can feel the current tensions. The DPRK is now suffering from a shortage of fuel, which affects its manufacturing and society a lot. The price of diesel has surged from $500 a ton to $1,350, but you still can't find any diesel at this price. Our DPRK partner asked us to solve this problem, but we couldn't.
Peng says his factory in the DPRK was supposed to complete the processing of seafood in early June, but now it has to be suspended a month ahead of time due to fuel shortages.
The sanctions are getting tougher. Now all exports to the DPRK must be declared to customs, but in the past we sometimes got through the customs with trolleys filled with goods. We're now very pessimistic about the future. Many of us, at least 10%, are considering quitting our trade with the DPRK.
But for big dealers, quitting is not an option. Su Yansheng's company is one of the largest seafood importers from the DPRK, with annual sales of 300 million yuan.
We're quite worried about the situation. There is no turning back. We can only carry on since we already come this far. We hope the future will be better.
Chinese banks have terminated their operations in the DPRK, so traders now have to carry cash into the country. Sometimes it takes dozens of people to deliver the money. Last year, the Chinese government implemented tougher sanctions on the DPRK following the latest UN resolution. And Peng says the DPRK took offense.
Many of them think China has betrayed the DPRK, so now they prefer to do business with Russia.
China accounts for 85% of the DPRK's total foreign trade. As country build
U.S. is conducting. Clearly, we're trying to get Kim Jong-un's attention. Is it working? Does he pay attention to that kind of thing?
I don't think Kim Jong-un is paying attention. He is a very paranoid man. He's very concerned about Washington and deterring Washington. So when the Trump administration says all options are on the table and we test ICBM missiles, I think we're getting his attention.
We're also getting ready to apparently ratchet even tighter the sanctions that exist on North Korea. Will that be helpful, effective, do you think?
I think it will be helpful. Sanctions have been in place for a couple of years, but strong sanctions have been in place only for about a year. For Iran, it took about 3 years. But North Korea sanctions have not been effective before because of enforcement issue. We don't have enforcement on the ground. So secondary sanctions, I think, is important. But this means probably going after Chinese banks and entities that do illicit business with North Korea, which will then cause strain with Beijing.
Yeah, the Chinese have indicated to President Trump the fact that they are willing to get a little tougher on North Korea. Do you see active signs of that other than blocking the coal shipments, for instance?
I think we need to see, and that's something that will take time. If China is indeed serious this time around, China did unfortunately say many times in the past that they will do it and they will enforce sanctions, but we know that China has not been active in that. So we'll have to see if China will really this time, if they mean serious.